Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Gascally Stainless from Gearworks.com, the E2KG Network, the GWW, and probably a dozen other places. We are back tonight with the E2KG Entertainment crew here for another episode of Correction X. And here with me, as always, I have my partner in crime on the E2KG Entertainment crew, Mr. Dave Petchy. How you doing tonight, Dave?
Hey, man, doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Excellent day. So this is a show called Correction X, where we discuss the Fox Network's new show, The Gifted. It is spoiler territory, so we will definitely be talking about things that happened in the episode. This show, is specifically targeted at fans, and we assume that you have watched the episode before you've popped over here to listen to us. So if you are not a fan of the show, then go get caught up. If you are a fan of the show and you've been hanging out with us for the first couple episodes of this podcast, go watch episodes 5 and 6, and like I said, get caught up and then come over here. So, and this is going to be an interesting episode because we're also going to have a chance to talk about some news that went down this week and how it kind of interrelates to this show in terms of the rumors that Disney may be vying to purchase 21st Century Fox or 20th Century Fox. I don't know why I keep saying 21st Century Fox.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Oh yeah.
I'm not such a fan of that, but
yeah, Windows. Let's not try and do the Fall Creators update right now in the middle of my podcast. So, we missed 1 week due to some scheduling conflicts, and we are back this week to talk 2 episodes tonight. So let's start with season 1, episode 5, titled "Boxed In." This episode picks up after the escape that the mutant resistances hit on the convoy that was transporting Reed and Polaris and finally extricating them from captivity. So this picks up on the other side of that. So the first scene that I wanted to talk about is about 5 minutes into this episode, where Thunderbird tells Marcos and Polaris about Pulse. Polaris and Eclipse are resistant and reluctant to the idea. And this is kind of where we first start to get the key indicator, and this is going to be a running theme over this episode and next, that the Thunderbird really kind of blames himself for Pulse being captured and being turned against mutants. We're still kind of at this point trying to figure out, and everyone is speculating over whether or not Pulse turned of his own volition, or whether he is somehow being controlled. And that kind of gets kicked around a lot. But what I really like about this particular scene is after Thunderbird gives them his explanation, Eclipse and Polaris take off in one car, and the Struckers and Thunderbird take off in another. Eclipse and Polaris are tasked with distracting a Sentinel Services drone that has been dispatched to track them. And they take down the drone, but they have their first real conversation after reuniting about the baby that Polaris is carrying. And we get the first of what is going to be a recurring theme over the next 2 episodes as well. The first out loud, distinctive, unquestionable nod towards other lore in the X-Men universe when Polaris mentions that if the child is a girl, that they should name her Aurora. Now, for people who are familiar with the lore, obviously Aurora is the name of one of a female of a pair of twins who were members of Alpha Flight. Alpha Flight was one of my big gigs. It kind of debuted when I was into comics, so I was there for issue number 1. I didn't know all the X-Men history behind Puck and Wolverine's integration between Alpha Flight and the X-Men. But they've always been one of my favorite teams. I read those comics when I was a kid. I definitely loved the unfolding of the story of Sasquatch and I think Snowbird, I think was her name. And I loved how I loved how the characters, how there was so much mysticism between them with Shaman and his daughter Talisman. And I always kind of wanted to see that team remain around longer, so I could have seen more interaction between them and Doctor Strange. So they mention Aurora, and these two twins, their claim to fame is that they could fly. They could fly very, very, very fast. And I thought that they were going to wind themselves around to mention the name North Star as well, if it was a boy. And of course, North Star was the male member of that set of twins. And the notable thing about that character is he was an Olympic gold medalist in ski events. And it was later found out that the reason he was a gold medalist was because he was a mutant and had been cheating. And that if you looked very closely, you would have seen that his skis were levitating a couple of inches off the snow. So he was flying through. So he was basically flying down the slope without encountering any actual ground friction between his skis and the snow. And no wonder he was faster than everyone else. And in fact, there was a story arc in Alpha Flight, I believe, where he was actually stripped of his gold medal. So yeah, I don't know. What did you think about this opening sequence in this episode, Dave?
The only thing that's
and help me out talking through anything else that you want to while I get the social media out real quick.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Aurora was like the only part that stuck out to me. I had to actually look her up, and I was like, is she important? Like, should I know about this person? And it's just kind of what you said. I learned that she was in one of the Silver Age of comics. So that was cool, that reference.
Wait, really? They're calling it the Silver Age of comics?
Oh, sorry. I guess I'm wrong. What would you call that age?
No. I maybe it was. I guess maybe I'm older than I thought that I was.
Well, it looked like, when I looked it up, it looked like kind of 70s, and that's kind of what I assume is the Silver Age.
It was mid to late 80s, so I think
okay.
Or golden age.
Okay, gotcha.
So I'll keep my masculinity and my pride intact.
Overall, I really liked both episodes. I kind of liked episode 6 more because it was a great. So it was very meaty, and it had a great setups kind of for the rest of this season and things that could come up in other seasons. I then did some research before this started, kind of like timeline-wise, where The Gifted falls in line with the movies. So kind of a short synopsis would be it's decades after X-Men First Class, roughly a decade after X-Men The Last Stand, years before the Dark Future and Days of Future Past, and it's between the Westchester incident and the events of Logan, which I think we kind of covered that. But one thing that started sticking out to me is got the wiki up and look up this guy's name again. Roderick Campbell, played by Garrett Dillahunt.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Just before you get into that, so what that tells me is that the Westchester incident and the incident which they showed in this episode, and is a key thing we ought to talk about, are two different events. Because I was thinking that the Professor Xavier incident, which was the Westchester incident, was what they were showing in this, but of course they are down in Atlanta. So the June 15th event, which has kind of become the moniker that they're sticking out there as a label for the incident that spawns a lot of the angst in The Gifted, is apparently not the Professor Xavier event in Westchester, I guess.
Right, but the one that we actually saw, I believe, was in Dallas, right?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, that was in Dallas. So I still think that we're somewhere between the Westchester incident and the events of Logan. Because for some reason, we don't know why the X-Men have gone into hiding and the Brotherhood aren't around either. So on that note, my guess is kind of this Roderick guy might be some clues to kind of that disappearance, and I'm almost starting to wonder, because I was looking back in Logan, they were talking about that they were experimenting so that there was no more natural born mutants. And I'm starting to wonder if we're kind of leading up to that, and if this guy who's experimenting with mutants is kind of a part of that or will allude to that. Because it's interesting that he's wanting to look at the I think it's eugenics or the genetics of the twins, and the fact that he's looking at genetics is like very like and then the other thing I've kind of been wondering so far, it's very odd, is that in all the X-Men kind of universe, like usually there's a psychic that we've ran into, and it's just crazy that we don't have a psychic in the whole, like, I'm wondering if they did it because like a psychic would have given away too much of the story so far, like right when they captured Chase, like we could have just had somebody read his mind and but instead we don't have a psychic. And so a lot of that, we don't get to know about yet.
Yeah, and it could be, that their feeling was just that a psychic would have been
OP.
Well, it just would have been that they've done that so many times before, right?
That too, yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't, and and the thing is that you get a lot of very interesting X-Men stories when you don't do that, right? Like characters like Eclipse and Thunderbird, to me, are a little more straightforward, kind of in their superhero kind of interaction with the world, and so I kind of I've never been a fan of like the Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor. All those characters. I get it, but I'm more a fan of like the straight up, like I will blast you with eye blasters or punch you or run super fast kind of characters. So
yeah, and then timeline wise, I don't know exactly if we have a date, but I'm pretty sure that The Gifted is set in 2017, or at least in the 2000s, right?
Yeah, I think I want to say it's now, or it's like it's supposed to be like a few years into the future or something like that.
Okay, because all the X-Men, well, how do I want to put this? The X-Men, the reboots like Last Stand, Days of Future Past, like, so we went from 70s, 80s, and then there's going to be 90s. So this is definitely like, so we don't like so far in the future, because like Magneto's still like pretty young in the movies, so it's likely that he hasn't had Polaris as a child yet.
Right. I mean, so you mentioned that it sounded like you mentioned, or it felt like X3 Last Stand was supposedly in the 90s, and this is like a decade later.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So that makes sense. So it might even actually be a few years. It might even be like in the aughts, right? In the 2000 to 2010 time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of what I'm getting at. And then I was also kind of brushing up on like the mutants that we have so far. We haven't seen much of Sage. The guy who's kind of got the crystal face is named Shatter. And then the other thing, general vibes that I've gotten from these episodes is I definitely keep feeling that there's going to be a split where some people go off and join like the Brotherhood of Mutants. And I don't know if it's going to be like the full-on Brotherhood, like maybe Magneto's gone somewhere else and then somebody like Mystique or somebody else is running them right now. But we actually haven't heard, I think, about the Brotherhood since episode 1, and I think episode 6 is the second or third reference to the X-Men. And it's very vague too. They said that they didn't say like Professor X said. They just said the X-Men said that there's a war coming. They didn't say who from the X-Men said that. So I thought that was very coy.
Yeah, but it was interesting, and we'll talk about that when we get to that section. I was going to jump ahead, but that would be bad. So a little more on episode 5 before we skip over to episode 6.
Yeah.
Also, in this episode, we get the Struckers arriving at the Resistance HQ, and we get this conflict between Fade and Reed. So, Fade is the bartender that we've now seen a few times show up. Again, this similarity between this feeling of similarity that I have between this show and The Walking Dead. And I don't know. Again, it could subjectively be. It could be a placebo, just driven by the fact that they both are supposedly take place in Atlanta, and a lot of the filming for both of the shows happens in Georgia. But Fade is a character. I'm starting to pick up on these characters that I feel like if I take that character and pick them up and move them over and plop them into The Walking Dead, could they be the same character? And the answer is yes. And Fade is one of those characters. Like you could forklift him from The Gifted into The Walking Dead, and he could play just as he's playing it on The Gifted. So we get this conflict, which again was a very The Walking Dead-like scene, because we constantly have these conflicts between characters and questions of who's loyal to who. And we get this conflict between Fade and Reed. Reed decides to take the higher ground and try and reason with Fade, who appears to perhaps not be capable of reason, or just isn't interested. And I want to. So this is one of these frustrating things in movies and TV where actions have taken place which should elicit a certain meaning to be extracted from a series of events. And yes, Reed had a tracker on him in the truck, but he told Fade about it, and he jumped out of the truck. Now, Fade still holds him accountable for actions he took before that, and I'm like, but Fade, are you just completely dispensing with the fact that the only reason you know he had a tracker is because he admitted it, and he jumped out of the truck, right? Because I mean, so do you hold him accountable because he was tempted? Like, so this is one of these things that it feels like it's a little contrived just to make a story out of something that shouldn't be a story. But it does illuminate the fact and the danger that while the Struckers are trying to integrate with the mutant resistance, the fact that the parents are human can still leave them subject to a lot of distrust, and maybe not completely being that they still have a ways to go to really be part of the tribe, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Any feelings or thoughts from your side on that conflict in the show?
No, I kind of agree. Like that scene kind of was like, okay. And then later on, I kind of thought that Fade was going to ditch him when they had to re-meet up, because I was like, oh shoot, like this dude sounds like a I don't know if I should say it, but an a-hole.
Yeah, and he's kind of telegraphing the whole time that he's like, when Thunderbird intervenes, he's like, yeah, boss, I got it, no worries. And I'm like, come on, man, he hasn't turned the corner on this thing yet. And so yeah, so in a scene about 28 minutes into the show, into the episode, we get Fade is supposed to kind of go around the corner and wait to pick Reed up after the team comes up with a plan for Ray to just kind of saunter down the street in the downtown Atlanta to be picked up by surveillance cameras and get the police to head in his direction, because the Sentinel services and the cops have been trying to track the escaping mutants and the Struckers so that they can find out where their hideout is. And so Reed takes off to throw them off the scent, and Thunderbird assigns Fade to be his getaway driver. Fade is supposed to kind of meet Reed 2 blocks up and over from where he drops him to make their escape, but when Reed gets there, Fade is not there. So the cops are closing in on him. I think they actually take a shot at him. And Reed, in his effort to escape, finally runs into the Mustang that Fade is driving, and realizes it's him. Fade opens the door and lets him in, and says that he was just testing him to see what side he was on. And I guess that's the resolution of the conflict. So this is one of those things that I hope this has been put to bed, because I don't like to see things like this linger.
Oh yeah, that would be annoying if this came up again. Yeah,
right. And you and I think we're both fans of Marco Polo, but that was one of the things that Marco Polo suffered from, in my opinion. The son Jin, I think his name was Jin, who would hate Marco Polo for taking all of his father's attention, and not he felt like not giving him enough deference as the heir. But then they would resolve things, and there would be peace between them. And then like some ridiculously minor incident would happen that would set Jin off again. And then Marco Polo was like this outcast. So like at a certain point, Jin, like you either decide you trust the guy or not. So yeah, I hope this is not revisited. So one of the things we skipped over in jumping ahead was there's a story in this episode about Andy who. When you mentioned, you feel like there's going to be this split from the Resistance. He's the guy that I constantly worry about is going to kind of go evil because he's very young and very impressionable, and he constantly questions why they put up with the silly humans, right, when they could just crush them.
Yeah, no, I totally feel like there's a foreshadow coming, and it's going to be heartbreaking where, Andy, it's kind of that typical kid's been bullied all his life. Now he's empowered, and he's like, there's nothing that's going to, stop him. But it's going to be sad because, his family cares about him, and his dad's trying to, do everything he can, because he's had a non-present dad. His dad works all the time. And so he's going to go down this path of kind of like, I don't need you now. I've got power, and I feel like he's gonna be easily manipulated, and it's gonna be interesting. If there's gonna be like some sort of like Magneto event, that kind of triggers him to go bad. Watching his dad get killed or something. And so I'm interested to see how that goes down.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point that I haven't brought up before. And you're right. That scene in the locker room where he's being, where the cold shower water is being run on him, and his powers first fully manifest themselves. A lot of cinematic similarity in that scene with the Magneto scene from.
Oh yeah.
From the original X-Men, right? When he's in the concentration camp and separated from his parents, and his powers manifest themselves, and he is starting to tear asunder the barbed wire fence because it's of course made of metal, and doesn't stop until a Nazi comes over and hits him with the butt of his rifle, and then the camera pulls back and you can see the mass destruction of the fence line that Magneto did. And then, so the last thing in this episode. So I guess the only other thing I mentioned is it's brought up in this episode that Andy is it O negative?
Yeah.
Is the universal donor? Is it O negative or O positive?
Oh, let's see. I think I have it somewhere.
I can never keep that straight because I'm actually one of these.
I can't remember that.
I think it's O positive is the universal donor. So that's brought up in this episode. I don't think it's going to be a big deal as it plays out, but that is why he is supposedly able to be a donor for Harry. So the last thing I want to talk about in this episode is the other Struckers, Caitlin, Lauren, and Andy. Meanwhile, are back at HQ. They are trying to administer some, I don't want to say first aid, but give Harry some medical attention. Harry, of course, is the African American mutant. I want to say I think his name is. When I saw him in the
Shatter, or no, the other one. I got his name up. Hold on.
Yeah. Something that starts with an F, I think. Or maybe I'm mixed up. All I know is I thought his name would have been Shade or Shadow or something, and maybe they veered away from that name because the character is African American. I don't know. But it's something else.
I think it's Traitor.
Yes. Which I just don't. If this were science fiction, right? he could cloak himself. I guess I don't know, but at any rate, he's a character who has the ability to either cloak himself or blend in with his surroundings, kind of like is it an iguana that can do that, or a gecko?
Yeah, Trader is his name for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was shot last episode, so they're trying to resolve that. And so Andy is the first one who kind of buys some big, and this, of course, as Reed has left, the Struckers are now being looked upon with a great deal of suspicion. Andy scores some loyalty points earlier in the episode by being willing to give blood for a blood transfusion to Harry, and then at this point they have to remove the bullet that's been lodged, and so we need to see Lauren utilize her powers in a very surgical manner, requiring a high degree of precision. Whereas before, up until now, we've just kind of seen her throw these bubbles out in kind of more of a wide area tactic.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I just was reading on Trader. He's actually in the comics, and he's one of the Morlocks. So.
Okay. Yep, that would make sense.
Yeah. Just going back to what you were on. Sorry.
Yeah. No problem. So Caitlin gets the bullet out, but ruptures an artery. In the process of doing so, and Lauren actually uses one of her. We've seen her create these little air discs, but she's always created them in large volumes. In this instance, she makes one, and they actually use that to put pressure on the artery, which is a source of internal bleeding, right? So she has to create it and kind of drop it inside the incision Caitlin has made, and then with that pressure disc down there, Caitlin is able to sew him up. So, and then I guess the air disc just kind of dissipates. So that's pretty neat, getting to see her utilize her powers in that way. Anything else we want to talk about in episode 5 before we go on to episode 6?
Let's see, episode 5. No, I don't. I think that one I didn't have a lot of talking notes, and I think you kind of covered a lot of my thoughts. Oh, wait, no, that's right. So this is when the one thing that I did want to mention is that Blink actually witnesses Dreamer's power, and she kind of figures out what's going on, and then the whole resolution of that comes out. Or no, that's right. And she actually has the conversation at the very end.
Right.
Yeah. So that I thought was like pretty eventful and was a huge part of the episode. So
yeah, so something is clearly going to go on with Blink, but yeah, as you mentioned, she kind of finally sees enough evidence to confront Dreamer directly and inquire as to whether or not Dreamer did something to her. She does know now that memory is false. So Dreamer actually offers to remove the memory, but Blink refuses. And then,
which was interesting. Yeah, I was like, okay.
Yeah, I could see that though. I mean, just generally, I'm sure. I don't feel like Blink is unusual, just amongst a certain group of people who just don't like the concept of somebody rummaging around inside their head. Right? So I can kind of get that. So that sets a lot of the opening stage for the next episode, where Blink then confronts Thunderbird and asks him if he knew. And he admits that he did. So the two of them kind of have it out, and Blink kind of just walks around the corner, creates a portal, and walks out.
Which I think is great, actually, because I think it opens up many possibilities of what Blink is going to do while she's gone, and who she might run into, if she's going to run into the X-Men or the Brotherhood or the Morlocks. So I thought that was a really good plot device and many possibilities. And it's interesting. I think we see at the end of that episode, she's heading somewhere or is looking for somebody. And so hopefully we get to see where that's going pretty soon.
Right. So she's walking down a flight of stairs that she's descending into the Atlanta subway system. And of course, the Morlocks in their comic book incantation, that's where they lived.
Yeah.
An old set of subterranean tunnels that I think were an old part of the New York subway system. So yeah, it definitely creates possibilities. We have not left that character, even though she left the Resistance. As Dave mentioned, there's kind of a walkout scene of kind of small, I would say, story arc trailers where we see some interaction between Thunderbird and Dreamer, possibly suggesting that they're going to get back together romantically. And one of the things that we see is the small vignette of Blake walking down a flight of stairs as if she is looking for someone or some people. So going back to the beginning of the episode, in the previous episode, we found out about this federal building in Baton Rouge, where some of Reed's cases were sent to for something. Reed doesn't know what, but they've determined that they need to assault this building because either that is where Pulse came from, or it's possible Pulse is there, but it's potentially a place where they can learn and find out what it is that Sentinel services are doing to turn mutants against their own kind. As they kind of were standing around the table talking about the tactics of it, Andy comes in and says that he can be their way in. They're encountering some tactical problems with getting into the building or planning how to get in the building. And Andy comes in and says, well, I could just tear the wall down. And there's this exchange between he and Reed about Reed doesn't want him to go, but Andy quickly counters and says, are we going to have this conversation again? It's time you let me fight. I'm a kid, but the kids here are in danger too. And if anything ever happens where we're overrun, actually the children are the ones who are going to be in danger, arguably more so than the adult mutants. So, and we get to see Reed listen to this speech, and near the end, there's kind of you can kind of see a smile playing across his lips, and he's definitely messaging that he's proud of Andy for stepping up. And we kind of get this first element, maybe because they've been apart for so long, of Reed doing the classic thing that male parents do with sons, which is look at the son as your heir, right, as being the person who's going to step up and take your place. And one of the things Reed clearly likes is the notion that Andy is stepping up at this point. Any comments on your end, Dave, about the opening few minutes of this episode?
Nothing on the opening, no.
Okay, so further down the line, Andy and Reed pack up in the back of a truck that is going to smuggle them down to Baton Rouge, along with Eclipse. And Andy and his dad get into an argument because Reed's concerned that Andy's powers could kill someone, and kind of lashes out and says, I want to see you exercise better judgment. And so later on, when Andy takes a nap, there's a chance for Reed and Marcos to discuss things. And first, it's Marcos as a guy who didn't have a dad, emphasizing to Reed to keep trying to reach out to Andy because Marcos knows how it felt to not have somebody around at least trying to reach out. And then it kind of gets flipped around and it becomes about Marcos asking Reed about being a father because, of course, Eclipse is soon to be a dad probably within 5 to 6 months. And one of the big things Reed conveys to him is, I still haven't figured it out, right? And my kids are in their teens. And so it's a really good scene. And again, what I really like seeing are these openings where even though Caitlin and Reed are kind of the humans, that there are these spaces for mentorship and leadership that are I feel like they're kind of clearly opening up so that they can eventually occupy them and become these key members in the Resistance.
Yeah.
So anything from your side, Dave, about that discussion between Andy and Marcos, or the interaction? I'm sorry, between Marcos and Reed, or the interaction between Andy and his dad?
None that I thought. The only time when I thought it got interesting is when they were in the truck. And I don't know, it's just kind of, it's interesting the distance that there is between the two right now.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. A little bit of what's going on is how there's a little bit of a mention of Andy's resentment that Reed, of course, is blaming himself for Andy being bullied, and he's like,
yeah,
could I have helped? Could I have done more? Could you have told me earlier? And Andy was like, I don't I don't know how I could have told you earlier. And then also specifically mentions that, hey, the whole reason I was getting beat up in the shower the night of the dance is because you came to school and tried to help and told the counselor, and those guys caught wind of it. So interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and then I think in that truck, like his dad tells, I don't know if Andy knew that the dad went to talk to the counselor, but it feels like there's like a lack of communication because I think Andy didn't know that, and that was a part of the reason, like, you know, I don't think he wants necessarily his dad to intervene as much. And I feel like there's a bit of his dad trying to dictate how he lives his life. And, you know, no kid wants that really. You know, they want to do their own thing, be their own person. And so I see a lot of that between the two.
Yeah, I think Andy's perspective is that he would have much rather his dad have been around more and worked less, and then he would have talked to him about these things.
Yeah.
Because his dad would have been more available. So, yeah, they're definitely trying to work some things out. So about 34 minutes into the episode, and so earlier in the episode, I should say, this character named Wes is introduced. Wes apparently has a crush on Lauren and is trying to connect with her. And Wes's abilities are to throw illusions, incredibly accurate illusions of pretty much anything that he's ever seen before. At one point, creating an entire illusion of Rome for Lauren, so to the extent that like you couldn't tell that you weren't in Rome.
I don't know why, but I get the kind of the heebie-jeebies with Wes. Like there might be more to him that we don't know about. Like he could be undercover for like one of the other mutant organizations. So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. There's like already, if it's not him, that there's somebody else inside the underground that are keeping an eye on them.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely that possibility. And so in the episode at this point in time, about, like I said, 34 minutes in, Lauren proposes that so the Struckers, the Strucker men and Marcos are on the back of the truck returning from Baton Rouge, and notice that they had a cop follow them for several miles. So they call back to Resistance HQ for help. Lauren is around in that kind of stand-up meeting about what they're going to do, and mentions that, hey, Wes, you guys could use Wes and his powers to help sort this out. Polaris, who's kind of overseeing this mission remotely, while Thunderbird attends to the large influx of refugees that they're experiencing, I guess approves of Wes joining in on this mission. So, and earlier in the episode, Caitlin had kind of put her foot down about how Polaris was basically going around and training all of the young mutants. Caitlin bringing up the point that, hey, I know this is something you want to do, but you know I'm still her mother, right? And I'm still gonna have a say in which and how much of these activities she participates in. And so Polaris is like kind of gives her the whatever. But at this point, before she approves of Lauren going on the mission, Polaris does kind of look at Caitlin to kind of check off with her and make sure that it's okay with Kate for Lauren to participate. So that was an interesting turning point in the story. Before we talk about the last two episodes that I have, which are kind of near the tail end of the episode, what else from this episode did you find of note, Dave, that you want to talk about?
So again, I think this is the point where Jace calls in that doctor, and you know he has this one condition where he's like, "Give me everything on the twins," and reluctantly he agrees. It makes me kind of wonder if Jace kind of has some moral code, because he's like, well, these are kids. Like, what do you want to know about them? And the guy's just cold-hearted, and he's like, are you going to give me the information or not? And he's like, all right, I'll give it to you.
Yeah. I almost pulled my Google Home off the desk here. So, so we've kind of, I haven't been talking about those scenes as much because I didn't, I guess there was one scene that was kind of pretty powerful. So over the last couple episodes, what's been going on with Jace Turner, the obsessed federal agent and team lead in the Sentinel Services, is and you mentioned Dreamer coming in, and so Polaris and Eclipse had captured Jace in the previous episode, and Polaris was determined to get the information out of him about what was going on with these mutants who were turning on their own kind. Blake brought Dreamer to them, and apparently part of her powers is when she breathes the mist on you, another way that she can use it is to extract information from you. So Dreamer kind of went sifting through Turner's mind, but while she was engaged in that activity, the mutants were hit with a tear gas attack by an assault team being led by Jace's partner, who was trying to get into the place where they were hiding out. This apparently kind of went sideways because I think because she had to break off contact early. So I guess there's actually a process by which she kind of backs out from her telepathic engagement so that the victim doesn't suffer any kind of damage. But whatever happened, Turner, when he got home, the fact that his daughter had died he'd lost that memory, and so he kind of had to relive it again, which sucked. But yeah, there's an effort to kind of make you sympathetic for Turner's character.
Yeah,
it didn't work on me. That guy's still a jerk, and yeah, and the way he's behaving isn't justified. So, but it's kind of similar to the treatment that they've recently given Thanos in the comic, where when he first got his own book, they were going around kind of interviewing a lot of the characters in the Marvel Universe on their feelings of Thanos, and there was a lot done to try and make him like an anti-hero and say that, yes, he's done these bad things, but he also did all these other good things. And I'm like, yeah, no, you're good or you're bad, so
yeah.
And Turner's a bad guy. But yeah, I think his feelings about the Doctor are more so it's about being a government employee, and there's this thing where excuse me, where as good as somebody is, you never allow that coming across the threshold between government and contractor. I think that's more so what it is that he normally wouldn't divulge some of this stuff or turn things over to somebody else unless they were another government official who came down and flashed a badge at him and he could tell that they were senior to him. And that's not the case with Dillahunt's character. He's turning government data over to somebody who works in the private sector. And I think that's where he's having his issues.
Yeah. And then also midway, we get that conversation with Dreamer and Thunderbird, about the war, and we've talked about this earlier, and also the problem where they keep getting more and more refugees. And so, that kind of reminds me of The Walking Dead. You've got all these people gathering in one spot. You got the enemy getting even closer. So that there's going to be this huge kind of like the fall of the farm and The Walking Dead, or I forget where it was, where everybody goes their separate ways and then they meet back up later.
On the road to Terminus when the mayor leads the final assault on the prison.
Yeah.
Yep.
So go on.
Yeah, so last two things that I'll talk about in episode 6 were near the end the Strucker men reconcile. There's kind of a nice scene, and we'd seen this scene before. And I guess I hope it continues. Like there's this Monopoly set in the Resistance headquarters. It's old. The money is moldy. They use $10. They use like the $10 bills to represent all denominations. So it doesn't have all the pieces. But the thing that the Strucker kids mentioned earlier this season was that Reed Strucker was always the shoe where the family played Monopoly, and so in part of this reconciliation dialogue between Reed and Andy, Andy says, "I think you should be the shoe." So it's kind of a touching scene where, that's the clear indication of their actually being reunited. It kind of punctuates that they're very much trying, and I don't mind it. It's pretty much what every superhero show is trying to do these days. And the CW show started this. They're definitely trying to make the show more about family and the relationships than they are about everybody's superpower set, right? But then the other thing is, and it's the thing that closes out the episode, is we see Carmen, who is the head of the Colombian drug cartel in Atlanta, who told Marcos, I'm going to give you the information you need, but then you're the hitman that's on my speed dial. Calls him up to call in one of her favors, and basically, says, "Look, this is the deal we made, and if you don't comply, then the next phone call I'm gonna make is to Sentinel Services." So the thing that this caused me to think about is, like, I don't think Marcos can stand for this much longer. And my one thing is, if the other mutants find out about it, I'm pretty sure an assault team is going to be mounted up to go and take down Carmen and her cartel. And I'm pretty sure that that's what's going to happen. And that might actually be next episode. So what else?
Yeah. So kind of towards the end too, I really kind of like the scene where Jace has this talk with everybody about their plans, and he's gonna, he kind of breaks the law, and we're gonna go search without warrants. And this one guy is like, "That's illegal." He's like, "We're gonna do it anyways." It's like, oh shoot, like this guy is a government worker and he hates mutants that much, where he's gonna break the law to get it done.
Yeah. So this is a thing. This is the thing with Bryan Singer throughout all of the X-Men movies. And I'm okay with it because it's historically what the X-Men have been used for. Historically, the X-Men have been the platform for Marvel to talk about civil rights and civil liberties. And it has been captained by a series of writers who use it as a platform to do exactly that. Their story is one that's used to talk about minorities. It's used to talk about an overly powerful government, and that's what they do here. Which is very timely.
Yeah.
In this day where people are concerned about the ability of certain specific agencies, Customs and Border Patrol, FBI, NSA, are concerned about the levels of surveillance, and if you keep up with tech at all, like I do, a recurring thing that is covered is how far can the government go in terms of checking out your smartphone, in terms of forcing you to log into your smartphone using your fingerprint or Face ID, or just your password. Can they access your social media accounts? Blah 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 blah. And one of the key things under discussion in this realm is whether the government should be allowed to just kind of hoover up data in mass, which has historically been a legal no-no. That was, when law enforcement agencies would go to the Justice Department, that would be an easy threshold, right? Are you tactically going after a specific person, or are you hoovering up data? And that was kind of what this conversation was about. But I guess the reason I love it is, like you said, I really need to see them keep twisting Jace into a very repulsive human being. And so that was here. One of his own team members is doing his job and advising him that, hey, we need to go get a warrant, right? You're gonna monkey. And Jason's like, I don't want to hear it. We're just going after people.
I agree with you. I hope they keep, for plot's sake, I hope they keep twisting him. And the other thing that stuck out to me too was when the doctor arrives, he's got kind of a mutant bodyguard with him that's just kind of zombied out. So again, that there's hints to this whatever they're doing to mutants going on.
Right, and that mutant bodyguard has the same kind of branding or symbol.
The branding, right?
Yeah, that pulsed it.
Yeah, and then so that's kind of my last note on this episode. I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed, the scenes between Lorna, Polaris, and I forget, Laura, or the mom, and that scene, and then also between Andy and his dad. Another thing I wanted to mention, I did a little bit more looking. So Shatter and Traitor are both a part of the Chicago Morlocks. So I thought that was interesting that two members that were featured in the Morlocks in the comics are already in this. So
yeah, and it definitely just makes sense in terms of pulling the lore together, right? If you're going to have this notion of outcast human beings who are resisting the government and the anti-mutant movement, that they would be something less in terms of organizational fidelity than like the X-Men. But so then I'll quickly mention that before we get out of here. So as you mentioned, in this episode we get 2 or 3 like very specific allusions to the X-Men, and part of the setup of the show, which, like you said, they have kind of veered away from the first couple episodes. It's a lot like Supergirl not mentioning the name Superman in episodes of her
cousin, right? Yeah, he's always gone by her.
Yeah, my cousin, or some we know you're talking about Superman. Just say Superman, right? Just but yeah. So it was very interesting. So what's mentioned is Thunderbird says, look, basically, in as a means of exposition, right? Basically reveals that what happened is the X-Men had a discussion before they went into hiding, and they said, hey, we need you to be the X-Man that we leave behind. And we're going to go into hiding, but we need you to go be a member of this resistance and try and help them and kind of lead them to the light. So it was interesting that it sounded like an acknowledgement that he was an X-Man. It makes sense in terms of how members of the resistance kind of view him in awe, because the whole time I'm like, why is this guy in charge of the resistance?
That's true. I never thought about that. If Thunderbird was an X-Men, yeah. And then also Dreamer must have known the X-Men too. So that's like interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't feel like she was necessarily that close, but she was at least aware of them. Yeah. She's definitely trying to be a positive reinforcement on Johnny as he's floundering and doubting and like I don't know why they chose me to leave behind to lead this thing. It feels like it should have been somebody else, and he keeps screwing things up. But it was very interesting. And as I had cause today as I wrote an article, which you can go see on gearworks.com, which unfortunately I don't have any in my lower third today, but it's GEARWERKZ. I wrote a post talking about all the bad things that could happen if Disney buys Fox. Because most of us are talking about that would be so great for them to get all these things back under one house, and I am not certain that it would be. But one of the things is I had cause to revisit who was in Days of Future Past, and I'd been thinking this whole time that Thunderbird, that a future Thunderbird was in there, and there was a character in there named Warpath, who was Native American, and very similar, if not the same power set as Thunderbird. So I don't know if and of course this is an alternate timeline, so I don't know if the thought is that Thunderbird will grow on to become Warpath or what, but yeah, it was interesting to kind of see all that pulled together and discussed in this episode.
Yeah, another thing I've been wondering too is will we talk about are the Morlocks around, but there's another possibility, and I think you might have brought this up before. Will the X-Men or the Mutant Underground become the Morlocks eventually?
Yeah, I kind of look at them as they are. Like that is this world's take or version of the Morlocks. They've kind of turned them into the mutant resistance.
Yeah. Or officially, like they become known as the Morlocks. Is like what I'm. Yeah.
Could be. All right, man. Well, I think that's all we've got to cover tonight. David, did you have anything else?
No, man. That was like I'm just surprised we did it in that amount of time.
Yeah, in an hour. So thanks once again for joining in with us tonight. If you happen to wander by the live show, or if you happen to check out this archive video, either directly on the GWW Radio Network YouTube channel or SoundCloud channel, or in syndication over on our own E2KG Network YouTube channel, or via my blog on gearworks.com. Thanks very much for listening in. If you have feedback and or a different take or a different discussion point on any of the things we talked about or any of the things we didn't talk about, by all means hit me up on Twitter, which you can see in my lower third right here, @AgaslyStamus, or hit up us as a crew over here at E2KG Network on Twitter. And swing by and check out all of my gaming content on my YouTube channel, Rounding Off Infinity, where if I can transition quickly enough, I'll be live streaming a little bit of some racing games that I have while playing on my wheel and pedals on my gaming desktop. Probably a little bit of Need for Speed Most Wanted, which is an old game, but I still like playing it, and Dirt Rally, which is a newer game from a couple years ago. So that's going to do it for myself. On behalf of myself and my co-host, Dave Pecci, and the E2KG Network and Geeks Worldwide, that's an episode of Correction X in the can, and we are out of here.